Welcome, welcome everyone. My name is Anitra Henry and I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Institute for Public Relations. IPR is a nonprofit dedicated to fostering greater use of research in public relations and corporate communications. Today marks our celebration of IPR's 65th anniversary and our first ever IPR Give Day. We are celebrating with special events and surprises for IPR supporters and contributors who make our vision possible. We hope you can follow along with us, spread the message, share on social, and donate if you're able to. You can learn more about IPR Give Day at our website, which is instituteforpr.org. Before we start, if you have any questions at any time, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit. Our great presenters today will collect the questions and moderate as they see fit. So with that, let's get to it. Integral, an employee activation agency, and the Harris Poll, a market research and analytics company, recently released a new report called the Integral Employee Activation Index. The report explains the impact of societal and political issues and workplace experience on employee perceptions and behavior. This webinar will dive into the key findings. Leading the webinar is Ethan McCarty, CEO of Integral, and Rob Jekielek, Managing Director at the Harris Poll. Thank you both so much for being with us here today. So with that, Ethan, I'm handing you the floor.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anitra. And it's such a privilege to be with you all today. I have personally been a beneficiary of IPR's fabulous research. I spent a bunch of years at IBM and at Bloomberg prior to founding Integral, and I've just been a follower and a supporter for a long time. So I'm just so pleased to be part of today's event, to be part of Give Day. It's a big deal for us at Integral. And it is also just really, really fun to get to share the time with my friend Rob, with whom I've had a great ongoing dialogue over the years. We have our shared connection through IPR and Page and a lot of shared interests. So it was natural for me to reach out to Rob when I wanted to conduct this study. For many years, I've been on the receiving end of very interesting studies about employee engagement, employee satisfaction, various motivating factors, different kinds of communications tendencies, and so on. But in founding Integral, my sense was that there were still a lot of questions to be asked, maybe a little bit differently. And so, we have a point of view at Integral that employees are a public, perhaps the most important public of any organization. And, very often you see that employees are kind of treated almost like owned media in a way or something, like we'll just interrupt people with a message and expect them to go take action, or like paid media. We own the employee's field of view. And so we should be able to sort of like push them into this direction or that. And by giving them the message one time because they're paid, they should be able to internalize that message. But we would advocate that, first of all, employees are not media at all, but if they are in that analogy, they're earned. So employees must be won over, and the way you do that as an employer. Well, one of the key mechanisms for doing that successfully is communicating successfully. So if you have any, if you want to have any chance of aligning employees with a strategy and ensuring that their behaviors and actions align with that strategy, not just what they do, but how they do it, it's really, really important to understand their perceptions of what is most important to them. So we came up with this construct called employee activation, which stands in contrast to internal communications, because we have identified a group of people, employees, who are remarkable for their and identifiable for their relationship with an employer. And then activation, that is the sense of their activity. So do their behaviors change? Do they stay constant, and so on, as opposed to internal and communication, two constructs that are useful, maybe in identifying a department for budgetary reasons, but not really in line with how people experience work. So today, Rob and I are going to share with you a readout from the research that we did. As you mentioned, the Employee Activation Index is what we're talking about today. I'm just going to share my screen. Is that looking okay to you all right now? Yes, you can see the screen. Good. Okay, so we're going.
Ethan, we can see your screen, but you can see your desktop. So it's the screen on top of your desktop.
Thank you. Let me just get that right here. Right. Okay, thanks. That's probably looking a little better there, a little sharper. All right, thanks, Rob. So in fielding the research, I want to turn the mic over to you for a second, Rob, just to talk a little bit about how we went about it and who the research comprises and so on. So would you mind sharing a little bit about that, Rob?
Yeah, we'll just kick off very quick. So a very deep representative sample of employed Americans, right? So again, here what we're looking for is people who have, they have an employment role. And by getting a sample of 2,000 versus a more kind of typical 1,000, we're also able to dig into a lot of underlying demographics. So clearly we can get into generations. There's actually some really interesting mindsets we're going to look at, and in addition to a variety of social and political issues. We'll also be able to go a little bit under the hood in terms of demographics, such as racial background, right? So again, we're looking at a sample here that's representative of the working public, also representative of white, Black, African American, Hispanic, as well as a number of additional demographics, but namely rolled up into Asian or Pacific Islander. In addition to that, again, just a clear representation across generational groups, which is really important when you look at this study, right? We're looking at both attitudes and behaviors, and we really want to see what that intersection looks like based on the background and how people are viewing the world today.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we are talking about the workforce, and so it was really important for us to talk to employed people, and so that's kind of the perceptions that we were trying to gather. We did one of the place where I would like to start is with this idea of political and social issues. We gave participants a pick list of 25 issues that we thought that we asked them whether or not they thought it was important for their organization to make a positive difference on these issues. And you can see it's a very wide-ranging list from Israel and Palestine issues to Second Amendment rights, access to healthcare, the environment, and so on. And where people landed, the top 5 issues. First of all, I guess I would say, Rob, I think when we were talking about it, it was, I think, surprising to both of us that environmental issues didn't rank a little higher because there's so much. Even like today, I'm sitting here in an office where it's like raining in my office. New York City is basically underwater for like the 4th or 5th time in the last couple months. So people are really, really focused on environment, but it came in at about 18%. But the number one issue that people chose was employees' good health and well-being. And so that's the number one issue. 40% of people put in their top 5 that this was the most important issue for employers to take a stand on and to make a positive impact, followed by a cluster in between 20 and 26%. But the next one in that list is job creation. And so just internally, we had we have some hypotheses about this. And the kind of leading thought that we've got right now is that we are in a moment where many institutions are failing people, everything from, overrun healthcare or people suspicious of the police, governmental, log jams and so on. And meanwhile, we have a very, very, in the midst of this pandemic, we have a strong need to be taken care of. And so we think people are potentially looking at their employers and saying, hey, I want you to have my back when it comes to my economic security and my health and well-being. So it's very important. I think many people who are in our profession of communications have already spent the last year like really doubling down on this messaging. I think that this is a strong indication that that's going to continue. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the third on the list is racial inequity, discrimination, hate crimes, prejudice, and bias. And so, in the midst of, particularly in the United States, a really widespread reckoning with systemic injustice and systemic racism, it makes a lot of sense that this would rank highly. This is definitely something that's been on people's minds, and absolutely people have been experiencing this issue in the workplace in any number of ways. The one that I think surprised me most is the next one on the list, and that's data privacy. I would never have guessed that data privacy would end up being an issue that employees want their employers to make a positive difference on. But again, with the environment in which we're all living, where there's a data breach, a hack, a disclosure, every day some company is under attack, or the government's under attack, or governments are attacking each other. Oh my gosh, the cyber sort of environment is very threatening and volatile. Meanwhile, who has more information about you than your employer? So I think one of the things that this indicates for folks in our profession is that it may be equally important to ensure that employees understand that you're taking care of their data and build that into your messaging as you do. I mean, here we are in the midst of Cybersecurity Month. As you're going about, creating campaigns to protect your organization's data privacy and sort of cyber, surface area, be sure to include that message that, you've got the employee's best interests at heart as well. Yeah, Rob.
Ethan, I'll just add on to that, right? I mean, I think when you look at the world today, especially in the US, everything around the cybersecurity, as you mentioned, and ransomware, data privacy is more top of mind for Americans, and especially employed Americans, than it's ever been. Again, an issue that maybe has been more centered in certain industries in the past is now kind of ever present. And I mean, what we're seeing here in general, I think it lines up really nicely with the bigger perspective on things, but especially because we're looking at employed Americans, you don't get as much of just the access to healthcare. If you look at a broader public, we actually just finished a study with the Milken Institute looking at 27 different countries. And one of the consistent takeaways was access to healthcare. So here it's a bit of a different vein and a much more unique and purposeful perspective for employed Americans in terms of well-being, as well as some of these other issues, which are so central to American life today.
That really is an interesting insight. And because, healthcare in the US is so deeply tied to employment, I can see how that would drive that number down. The last one on this list of the top 5 is 20% of people indicated that gender wage and leadership gap and gender equity in leadership roles was a top 5 issue for them. The good news here, I think, particularly is that the result, that result is more or less evenly split between men and women. So this is not like a women's issue. This is like a human rights issue. And so if you had any doubt about how to message that and how to support that, I would say full-throated is a good approach. Rob, any insights or perspective on that?
No, again, it's just a really good kind of evaluation of where the minds of Americans and employed Americans are today, and how it fits in with the broader cultural trends. These are all mission critical, right? These aren't kind of like sideshow issues. These are central priorities that employees really want to understand where you are, and relationship to employee support based on them.
Yeah. And, in the full report, which is available, it's freely available on teamintegral.com, you'll see that we did a number of different cuts of the data, these issues by things like, the self-selected ethnicity, generation, and so on. But one of the things that you pointed out to me, Rob, is that, that top line issue in particular is so evenly spread across the kind of ethnic or racial identities, that's one to really pay attention to. So there's a lot of discussion these days about whether or not it makes sense to enable and allow and encourage employees to talk about politics at work, to use employee systems, your Yammer, Slack, intranet, and so on, to discuss political issues. And it turns out that, like so many things in the US, we're pretty evenly divided around this issue. So about half of people believe that they should be able to have the ability to express their political views at work. And about half of people say they feel comfortable doing so. We did see some generational splits on that one. Rob, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty consistent split that you see across kind of America today, right? Like it's just everything is a lot of 50-50. And then you see splits that go kind of more one way or more towards social issues, more kind of stay quiet when you kind of go Gen Z versus Boomer as an example. But a very important kind of, context for communication and kind of ensuring that we're both kind of, being very modern and on trend, and also kind of empathetic to, the different kind of expectations that a variety of different stakeholders have.
One of the implications of what you just said, I think, is, you look at what your long-term hiring and employee experience strategy is going to be, and creating spaces in which people can express their political views and be heard in the workplace, that may become more of a requirement than a nice to have over time, given the tendency for millennials and Gen Zs to want to exhibit that kind of behavior in the workplace.
Agreed.
All right, so moving right along, this one is going to kind of drive the rest of our discussion, this area here around the 64-36 split. So we asked folks, do you feel that your organization performs on your personal values? So like, is there alignment between your personal values and the organizational values? And 64% of people said, yeah, actually my organization does reflect my personal values. And yet a very substantial number of people, more than a third, say they do not. Does this, you had some thinking about this split. I mean, when I first saw it, Rob, I thought, okay, well, great. At least a majority is, feeling that sense of alignment.
Yeah, I mean, 36% of any employee base, it's like a massive constituency, right? So if that constituency is with you, you have a huge edge versus peers, right? That's kind of like, think of this across your organization from the front lines to middle management. How are people waking up in the morning? What do they feel like? Are they energized? Are they motivated to go? Or are they feeling that, they should be looking for something different or just getting through their day so they can get to, the other important things in their life, right? So this is like that 36% of a workforce that's, 10,000, 100,000, several 100,000 those are massive numbers and a huge, if you're talking about strategy, right, this is where strategy lives or dies, right? If you have 36% of people who are kind of not kind of following through or giving that extra effort, your strategy will surely fail.
Well, and Rob, I think that's the linkage that we're looking for too, because what we're finding is that perception of the organization's values translates very much to how people show up in their work, how they feel, and what their sort of their kind of waking energy is to coming to work, which then directly relates to whether or not they're likely to advocate for or to work at cross purposes to a company's strategy. So, the folks who felt that alignment, 43%, so more than double, were likely to show up feeling confident. And you can see the split, same thing with grateful and motivated. So you have that alignment, you show up feeling ready to go. Whereas if you lack that alignment, it's more than 2.5 times likely to feel tired, indifferent, or underappreciated. About 3 times as likely on underappreciated. So, very, very big effect of that alignment on your mindset, which then directly translates to the behaviors that you would exhibit. So when you're feeling that alignment, employees say that they are almost twice as likely to stay with an organization in challenging times, go the extra mile for a colleague or a client, back to that discretionary effort that you just described, Rob, help somebody outside of their team or defend the organization, engage in mentoring, volunteer with the organization, or participate in a charitable giving or matching. So twice as likely to exhibit some of those behaviors that are positive to the organization.
Yeah, I mean, this is the key point I think, Ethan, you just made on these last 2 slides, right? If you're walking in to talk with your CEO and trying to figure out how we kind of address issues or take advantage of opportunities, marketplace opportunities versus fierce competition. What kind of employee does your CEO want to be there, right? What kind of employee does the management team need in place in order to beat the competition, right? It's just not going to happen if you don't have, it's that 2 times, right? It's a two times, it's not an incremental 10%, 20%, 30%. It's a 200%.
Yeah. And you look at the relationship to people's feelings of loyalty, their likelihood to publicly advocate by putting up a positive review online, their likelihood to stay with the employer, that all goes up as they experience that values alignment. This is a little bit, a little bit just to give you a sample of some of the tactics that we suggest. You can see in this chart, it shows that generally speaking, employees across generations are ready to give a positive review to their employer online. So this is something that we really encourage, and we work with, Team Integral. We work with organizations to help construct programs to get employees to do that kind of advocacy on behalf of their employer without getting in trouble with the programs like Glassdoor, LinkedIn, and so on. That said, you can also see, speaking of that behavior online, you can also see a much higher likelihood for those who have that alignment with their organization's values to interact with the company's channels online, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. So people are much more likely, if they're feeling really positive about their own their own values and the workplace values being aligned, they're going to follow on Facebook. They might share stuff on Facebook. They might, do those kind of things like on LinkedIn, almost twice as likely to interact with and follow the organization on these external channels. And then the same thing happens internally. So much more likely to participate in things like Slack, Yammer, intranet discussions, and so on.
Yeah, and Ethan, I would just kind of double down on your point on just a lot of these behaviors, right? I mean, today we're talking about attitudes and behaviors and how values have a big impact, right? Behaviors are such a critical component here. Right. As we know, if we get employees to starting to behave in ways that really kind of line up to the company and in ways they can express their values, right? That's how you get that self-reinforcing cycle, right? And you also you're getting the right people to opt in and showcase the kind of place that you really want to be and you want to bring in top talent to.
And we've talked about culture, or we've talked about strategy quite a bit, but culture is also affected as well. So, those who feel that alignment are much more likely to describe the culture in an organization with positive descriptors like supportive, safe, caring, purposeful, and innovative, which again leads to those behaviors. Yeah, go ahead.
Ethan, I think we should just leave this one up, right? I mean, how many of us at the company we work at have in some boilerplate or somewhere on our website or somewhere kind of on our wall a set of these words or a composition of these words, right? So these are the things we are striving for, and we've spent a lot of time and effort kind of reinforcing that this is what makes us unique. This is what we need to do in order to succeed, right? So what we're talking about today is one of the clear pathways for getting kind of engagement and real kind of action behavior, and stealing your term, activism and activation, right? Yeah. This is the critical key piece, right?
It's I'm really glad you brought that up. I think there's any good research answers a lot of questions. I think it also asks a lot of questions. I think when we do plan to do this research again, or maybe some variation of it, there's deeper probing I think I would like to do around culture, the perceptions of culture, but also how the cultural attributes also lead to some of those actions that you were just talking about. The inverse of a lot of these positive behaviors also happens to be true. And so we asked people if they thought a colleague or a teammate would do any of these actions, and things like warning a candidate away or quitting the organization and so on. And what we found was that, lo and behold, people who lack that values alignment, they're much more likely to say that a teammate would warn a candidate away. So 25% would quit, not comply with organizational policies, protest or walk out, which of course we're seeing, I mean, just in the last few weeks, pilots from United, employees at Netflix, there's unionization efforts, I think, underway at Kellogg's. I mean, there's a number of actions that are taking place on behalf of employees are taking a number of actions because of their sense of misalignment with their organization. And so, we see things like disclosing confidential information or even sabotaging the organization, which could be, any kind of thing. I mean, it could be, we've all seen the YouTube videos of people doing, terrible things in food service industry or delivering packages by throwing them over a fence and these kind of things. That's the kind of stuff that just, we believe will happen a lot less if you really put the effort into making that values alignment happen. I want to go through a couple slides just right now about some distinctions we found with those with kids in the household and those with kids not in the household, and then we'll open it up for questions in just a moment. I will say, if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the Q&A right now. Happy to take them, and we'll just keep moving along here. In general, folks with kids in the household are generally more likely to be activated, so taking behaviors against or for their employer. So you can see twice as likely to advocate for unionization, nearly twice as likely to write a negative review online, those with kids in the home, but also significantly more likely to be involved in a mentoring program or to volunteer at work, or even to buy company stock. We don't know, one of the things that we don't know about the no kids column, it could be empty nest. It doesn't mean that they're not parents. It could be empty nesters. It could be people who are very young and just haven't had children yet. It could be people who've chosen not to have children. We don't know much about that. But what we do know is that those who have children in the household are much more likely to want to return to the office. I see you smiling, Rob, because both of us as dads, very eager to get out of the home office and away from our children. And then, but also strangely, and I have no idea, maybe Rob, you have a theory on this, but those with kids in the household are less likely to show up at work saying that they feel tired. Rob, does that carry for you too? Do you just not feel tired in the morning?
I mean, I think it's a mixed bag, right? Like there's,
it must be your father.
Depending on what, yeah, exactly. Depends. I think, having a bit of a break is always helpful. I think, where we are today and coming out of the summer, hopefully there's a lot more normalcy in a lot of people's houses, right? So I think it's been I'm sure you can share this experience. It's been up and down, right? You both have had these opportunities to be like really close with family, especially with your kids. You're spending more time and it's fantastic. You're getting to see a lot of things. And then there's also certain things where, there's just a little bit more friction in the mix.
100%. And I wonder too, I mean, this will be really interesting to watch over time, how these data change as more folks are just like, they're back in the office and schools are open and so on in person. So we'll see how that, plays out. Again, here's another little breakdown. Go ahead. Rob, were you about to?
No, I was just gonna say, I think there's a lot of employers who actually are going out of their way to figure out ways to help kind of working parents and figure out how to make that work as well. Right. So I think they're a group that's definitely gotten a lot of kind of attention and effort during the COVID period. I don't know if enough, but like certainly there have been a lot of different efforts for sure.
So, we'll see, I guess, over time. This is obviously it's a point in time piece of research that's, during a very unusual time for the United States and for the world. So we'll see what carries through. But, as you said on another conversation we were in, Rob, if there's one thing you walk away with that 2X number. Those who have that feeling that their organization's values reflect their personal values are just twice as likely to feel positive feelings about their job, twice as likely to feel those positive or carry those positive beliefs about their company's culture, and twice as likely to take action, to mentor, to to help somebody outside of their team to go the extra mile for a client. And critically, during this moment of the Great Resignation, they're almost twice as likely to stay with the organization during a challenging time. Rob, any final thoughts before we open it up for questions, of which I do not see many?
Yeah, I think
there's activity in the background. There's some parenting going on, maybe in the home.
There's lots of parenting going on. Yeah, it's a bit of a blur.
It's all good now.
No, it's all good. I mean, I think the 2X thing is just such a mission critical as we're thinking of business success and strategy, right? Like it's, to the point you just made, the Great Resignation, the war for talent right now is fiercer than it's ever been, right? So if we're stuck in just kind of like short-term benefits like pay, yeah, I think there's a ton of research over a long period over the last couple of decades. Those are real like hygiene factors, right? Those are not differentiators. If you can improve pay, you basically get people to be like, oh, I don't hate the company and I feel it's being fair to me, right? These are the kinds of things where you're looking at real differentiators, where what you're really getting to is being able to enable employees to feel like they're part of something bigger, something that they actually should be proud of, something that they should be investing their resources in, right? That they should feel, very good about, like, spending time away from their family doing, right? And then feeling very confident coming back to their family and feeling very kind of grateful and motivated versus, depressed or underappreciated or tired, right? So this is the territory. And especially as we're looking at, the path forward, we're not looking at a 10% incremental impact. We're looking at a 2X benefit.
It's such a good point. And, one of the ways that I've been thinking about this for a long time, I mean, even in the founding of Integral, is that we're often asked to spend our days believing two things that are more or less opposite. Our personal beliefs may be in one direction, and then we come into the workplace and we have to conform to the beliefs of the workplace and the kind of behaviors of the workplace. And there's a term in psychology for the stress that one feels when having to hold two conflicting concepts in your mind at the same time. And it's called cognitive dissonance. And I really do believe it is possible for organizations to listen to their employees, understand what is most valuable to their employees, and not necessarily crowdsource the company's policy or values, though. I mean, I think there's a model there too, but emphasize within the organization's programs, within the organization's philanthropic effort, within ESG efforts, and certainly within the way executives and leaders show up in the organization, the ways in which that organization will value what employees value and will put their time, energy, and reputation at stake to support those things. And that's what you're talking about, Rob. That's that strategic differentiator that is completely available, I would say, to any employer. And yet, the opportunity, let's say, remains very, very broad.
Oh, totally. I mean,
yeah.
For a lot of people, you've just brought in a lot of talent where you've added whatever it is, 20, 30, 40% remuneration, right? You now really invested in a lot of people, like using hard-earned resources. How are you going to keep them?
Yeah.
Right? Is that going to be enough? So, and then also, what are you going to do to continue to keep the top talent that's seeing all these people coming in many cases, knowing there's a lot of, additional remuneration and incentives or whatever, right? This is kind of like this is the battle territory. This is the territory that we're in right now. This is where leading companies really differentiate themselves from the rest.
So with that, I'm opening it up for questions. Anitra, I'm not sure if you have any, or if there are some that are coming to you through chat that I don't see, and over to you.
Oh, thank you guys so much again for being here. So I don't think that I have any questions per se, but more or less, more of a deeper dive. I am just really curious about the whole employees being willing to sabotage their companies. Like, what differentials did you see across generational? Or were there any? Were there more Gen Xers that were willing to do it than, say, Zs or millennials? Did you notice any of those differences?
Are you projecting? Are you a Gen Xer? So are you ready to, should we be talking with, okay, all right, maybe we need to talk with the boss here. I don't think I have that cut by generation in front of me. I don't know if you do, Rob, but I think it's an interesting question. I think the thing that really jumped out to us was it wasn't a low single digit number. I mean, 17% is absolutely shocking to think that, if I don't have a sense of that support, and that my identity is seen, and that my values are reflected in my organizations, that I think 17% of my colleagues are ready to throw a spanner in the works. That is to me, that was a huge eye-popping issue.
Rob, did you notice anything about that?
We'll certainly double check the data and go back into it. I don't think there's anything that popped off from a generational perspective. I can say from other research that we do, most typically where you're seeing those types of things emerge, if they do, it's in large employee populations, and it's people who are feeling that they're further away from kind of the center of the organization, whatever that means, right? If the center of your organization is more of like a centralized force, then that's what it is, right? But again, it's more typically you're seeing, frontline workers who don't necessarily. So I mean, I think that's really important, because we're looking at a lot of, we're not just looking at hourly employees here or whatever, right? There are a lot of full-time employees, but you're looking at a lot of frontline workers, right? They have very different perspectives than, for a lot of employees, COVID's been very different, right? We're here on kind of like a virtual call, if you will. For a lot of, comms people, they're, if you're at, Kroger or Walmart, a lot of different organizations, you have a huge diversity of employees by their background, but also kind of the roles that they're playing, right? And again, sabotage can be like a very small thing, or it can be a very large substantive thing. So, but the numbers in general are very distressing to see that at 17%, right?
Absolutely. So I do have a question as we talk through this that I want to pose to both of you. So Ethan, I'm going to ask you first, because you mentioned in the beginning that you were shocked by the absence of, or where actually environmental issues fell, right? What other major takeaways really shocked you as you went through the data in this? And then Rob, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Well, I think, thanks for that question. I think one of the big things that kind of stands out to me, there are two. Actually, there's more than two, but two that I'll mention right now. One is just how heterogeneous our workforces are. I mean, that was definitely kind of an opinion I held previously, that we need to do a better job, particularly in organizations that have thousands of employees, of segmenting the communications and segmenting and personalizing the experience that employees have based on things that are relevant to them. So like my identity, or my schedule, or my needs, or whatever unique characteristics of myself that I bring to work. So that's one thing. And I think the data here just show we really need to be thinking one size fits all is rarely a good communications approach within an organization. And then the other thing was that I've spent the last 20 plus years of my life. I mean, I was working on IBM's Values Jam, almost 20 years ago. And I've been doing the values work for a long time. And it has always been my sort of hypothesis that we should include employees in the formulation of an organization's values, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who've got to live it. And, to some degree, most organizations do that. But at the end of the day, what often ends up happening is, kind of the tablets get passed down from the holy mountain, and here are the values, and now you must conform with them. And that's kind of the message that employees get. I think we're in a moment where that approach is probably perilous. It probably makes sense for employers to do a lot more involvement of employees in their the formulation of their values, how they're expressed, and then also understanding how the organization shows up in society, in the community, and is there alignment with people's identities. So it's kind of the inverse. It's almost like that listening capability. Most organizations massively over-index on their ability to interrupt, employees with messages and under index on their ability to understand the perceptions of employees and what employees care about.
Rob?
I was actually just so enthralled with Ethan's responses that I repeat the question at the beginning.
What's the question?
I just want to make sure that no.
Sure. So
yeah,
as you went through the data for you all
Yeah.
to compile this report, what were the major things that surprised you, that just really stuck out to you, that you were like, huh, that's an aha, I didn't realize this. This is not what I was thinking I was going to find as I go through the data?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one for sure is just the 2x impact, right? So as you're looking at that kind of values relationship, that for sure is the standout feature. And I think that one that a lot of communicators, managers, HR folks can take away in a very kind of actionable way. I mean, I think the big piece of it that's just, as you're looking at that as being kind of the key ingredient, it's making sure, just to the points that Ethan was making, that you're really understanding it in a much more contextual fashion. Right. So again, obviously I'm a huge advocate of research, but the whole kind of idea of being able to segment people into groups is critical. And I would just reinforce, especially when we're into the spaces that we're talking about here, qualitative insight is just as important as anything quantitative, right? Qualitative is a good validator, and you can have like these big kind of overarching takeaways that we're talking about now, but really kind of understanding how this fits in with people's lives and different kind of personas of employees is just a mission critical for being able to really kind of make it work in ways that feel right, and that people can really get behind and understand, versus it being more of like an esoteric concept.
Yeah.
Right? So again, the whole point of personalization.
That's so smart. And I think, well, I was just going to say, we at Integral, we work with a bunch of clients where we help them to develop these listening programs. And, it always starts with, okay, let's go field a survey. And I'm like, okay, well, probably we should have a survey of some sort. And,
Yep.
but, the actual interaction with employees on an ongoing basis in a dialogue is like, you can't replace that. And to the extent that can be, the leadership of the organization can be visible and part of that process is also really, really
Yep.
critical, because in the asking, you're also telling something. You're saying, look, I care. I'm going to spend the time, the CEO or the CHRO or some senior vice president is going to sit down and take time out of his or her day and actually listen. That is a powerful message in and of itself. And you can't really get that just from a quantitative.
But
yeah.
That is like one of the biggest misses. I would, not the biggest misses, but whenever you do research, you want to make sure there's a feedback loop, right? If people are telling you something, you want to ensure that, you're telling people you've heard them, and this is how you're actually going to change action in accordance to it. The other thing I'll just reinforce as more of like a tactical thing, from a lot of the work I've been doing over the years, it's like middle managers are also the critical ingredient to all of this, right? Really, really being able to address and figure out what's going on with middle managers. How do you motivate them? What do values really mean? How does it translate from kind of a concept in terms of day-to-day work? Because, right, for better, for worse, those are the folks that are translating kind of like the pillars from on high to kind of like the day-to-day job, right? So it's where the rubber hits the road, and all this stuff turns from kind of a data point or a concept into something that really works, or it doesn't. It actually, it empowers people. People feel good about it. They kind of dive in. They feel confident. They feel motivated, or they feel underappreciated and tired.
There's a question in the chat here from Barry Bartlett. Barry, thanks for the question. The question is, how do the results speak to the comprehensiveness and effectiveness of hiring, onboarding, orienting of new employees to ensure values are aligned out of the gate? It would appear many organizations are not doing a good job here. I tend to agree with your assessment, Barry, having looked at many onboarding programs in my career, but I think we do have tenure as one of the questions that we asked folks, but I don't think we did a cut on tenure against values alignment. But I think that's a really interesting question, and one that I definitely want to go look back at the data on. Rob.
Again, I think it'd be good to go back to the data to give you a firm answer, but I can give you, there's a general like anecdotal trend that I can refer to. Again, a trend that you see many times. When you look at employees that are first year or two in, they tend to be kind of like most high energy, most optimistic. That's kind of like the honeymoon period. right? They basically joined, they've really bought in. They're like, I'm in, I'm joining, I've made a choice, we found a good fit. For some companies, you're able to actually sustain that and you don't get like a plateau or dive. Your problem is that if people come in and they don't feel very well aligned, and then it just drops off after that kind of year or 2 year period. Like and you can see that in some companies pretty dramatically. Like those are huge risk or issue indicators. But to the point you're making, good onboarding is just, it's mission critical, right? Like it's not just, you want people to feel good about it, but you also want to make sure that people understand how the company works, how it operates, what it stands for, and how that gets operationalized in terms of decision making, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are the kinds of decisions that really get rewarded based on character and integrity versus don't, right? So it's really good onboarding that goes beyond just the benefits package is just such a mission critical.
I've looked at dozens over the years, maybe 100, I don't know, onboarding programs from companies I've worked with and for and so on. And it's really remarkable because I think there is a huge opportunity. I mean, a lot of them have a moment in the onboarding process. And it's usually like orientation, like you have to go sit in a room for a day or online for a day or whatever, and ingest a lot of PowerPoint. And at some point they say, here are our values, and maybe there's some storytelling around it. Here's why the founder loves the values. Here's why the employees love the values. Here's why our clients love the values, I think that's fine, but I think it kind of meets minimum. The best examples look at the values and bring those values into the candidate and even pre-candidate experience. Some of our clients, were working with them on the overall employee experience, reaching back into like, all right, well, how do we show up as an employer? Does our employee value proposition contain our organization's values? Does, on day one, I mean, we're just a small tactic. We're working with one client right now where, as they introduce new employees, they put, kind of a screen up at the town hall and they have a picture of everybody in their role. And what we're helping them change to is they put the picture up, they put their title up and those kind of things, but they also have asked employees in the candidate experience, which one of our 4 values resonates most with you and why? And so they actually get a verbatim, like, okay, well, this person joined this company because this value was important to them. And so getting people to, I mean, that's just like one small tactic, but getting people to actually interact with and, translate for themselves the values of the organization is as important as anything. It's more important, I would say, than, employees being able to recite them.
So do we anticipate any other changes in culture in the near future?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think we're in the midst of it. One of the things that I think happened, thanks for that question. I think it's a fabulous question given the topic that we're on. One of the things that happened in the last year and a half is that the remote workforce went from being the minority, the kind of forgotten minority, to the majority, and very central. And many executives, I think, leaders, really had for the first time their taste of being like a remote employee, not just being, in the corporate jet and needing to like dial in from there or something, but like actually being at home and having to interact with colleagues 100% of the time, through virtual mechanisms. I think that is having a profound impact on our relationship with work. And culture and the development of culture, particularly. It can no longer be the case that culture is, pizza Fridays in the office or something like that. That's not enough. The failure of the foosball table, I think, is epic. Like, we already knew that prior to the pandemic. I mean, when my team and I would do a site visit and we'd see a room full of foosball tables, we're like, okay, there's a failed culture initiative. And now I think there's going to be a whole new set of indications of whether or not your culture is thriving. People are going to look for signals in entirely different ways that may be, frankly, much more mediated through digital mechanisms such as what we're on right now.
Rob, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think right now you're in a massive culture inflection point, right? I mean, what culture looks like. I mean, what does collaboration look like, right? I think there's, again, I'm in this fortuitous position that we do lots of research on different topic areas. So, I mean, what you've seen happen with technology during COVID some of it's really, it's really hard. Everyone's stuck at home, but for a lot of people in terms of collaboration, there's actually been a ton of benefits, right? There's like, if you're going into, a collaboration session, you can actually get a lot of people from a lot more areas, like both a lot of backgrounds, a lot of different geographies. And in many cases, you now have a lot of people who may have more of like they're not necessarily the most vocal person, who actually have an equal voice, right? And technology is like a huge enabler for this, right? So there's actually a lot of really interesting inflection points that are happening right now. And hopefully for the better, kind of coming out of some, obviously a lot of the terrible stuff that, has been happening over the course of the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too, like the kind of, the kind of psychological profile of organizations, I think is also going to be impacted. And what I mean by that is there is a bias in most workplace design towards certain personality types. And so, like the round conference table where, the most vocal person wins, or, what have you. That is going to be it already is under a lot of pressure. And one of the things I think is interesting is this whole, this whole situation that we are in, that we've been going through with the pandemic, may have some very interesting implications for people who have different personality types. Introverts may have a completely different experience and platform now. Likewise, we are literally looking into people's homes. And I think the impact of that is profound. There is there's an implication for what about me when you see me log in from home and my children are running around. My identity is quite different. And so I think there's a potential, positive impact, I hope, for issues of inclusion in the workplace, to really be able to relate to people as humans in profoundly new ways that we never would have when we put our masks on, our metaphorical masks, not our actual K95s. When we put on our metaphorical masks and show up at the office, some of that I think is being pulled down, and that it already is having a real impact on organizational culture.
Yeah, I mean, and not to mention people who have like real like physical disabilities, right? I mean, it's 100%. Actually, it's pretty huge.
Yeah, we have one of our senior consultants. She has a physical disability brought about by a brain injury when she was a child, and she recently wrote an essay a couple months ago. It was just really fascinating, her year of not being disabled. Because she shows up on a Zoom and you don't see that she walks with a limp and so on. And so presenting in a very different way, and then showing up as we did together on in person at a client site was like, oh, right. Like they had no reason to think of her differently, and that changes the dynamic in some very real ways that, I hope there could be some silver lining to the cloud here, that people may be able to say, oh, wow, I just loved interacting with you. And now I see that you have some physical disability, and it's like, that's not central to my understanding of your identity at all.
Are there other ways that the two of you think that these findings might change in the next few years?
What's your prediction, Rob? Let's take some bets.
Prediction?
Yeah, if we run this survey next summer, what do you think changes?
All this stuff continues to get more important, right? I mean, I just think that, like,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, what you're at right now is people, like, if anything, over the last 2 years, there's been a lot of reflection on, what am I doing with my life, right? Like, why was I not? I think for a lot of people, like, why wasn't I spending more time with my kids? Like, why was why am I? I've heard this story, like, especially in investment banking, right? Where suddenly you had people who were, first couple of years in investment banking, and they just got thrown home because everything went so crazy. And like people around them were like, what are you doing? They had no idea that someone works in 100 hours or 120 hours a week. They're like, what are you doing with your life? And they're like, what do you mean? This is normal. they're like, no, it's not. Like, that's insane. People,
Yeah.
right. But it's people have just been like, okay, what should I be doing? What's important to me? Right. I mean, I think that if I'm sure many of you guys know people who've written like essays for entry into really, high end, whether it's Ivy League schools or MBA